skincare paste, also known as Pastry. All or part of this batter can be frozen and baked at a later time. The recipe can be cut in half for home use. In a saucepan, bring to a boil the water, milk, sugar, salt, and butter.
Today I want to show you a really nice dough that's made with basically 4 ingredients: water, eggs, flour, and butter. And this is an odd dough. It's called pâte à choux, and it has a lot of moisture in it so that when it is baked in the oven, it puffs up. And pâte à choux is used for a variety of delicious desserts and savories, including éclairs, cream puffs, and it's also used for gougères or cheese puffs. It's not hard to make, but the proportions, the ratio of flour to water to eggs to butter has to be pretty exact to get the right consistency and the right puffiness. I wanted to show you what your puffs should not look like. Here's one that obviously is very heavy, and when you break into it, it's doughy. It has no opening. You could not fill that with a crème anglaise or a whipped cream or ice cream for a profiterole. That is not the kind of puff that you want. This obviously has too much flour. Something's wrong with the ratio. And here's a beautiful cream puff. When you break into this one, has a perfect opening, a big cavity that can be filled with whatever you want, and it will taste good and it looks good and it's a nice round shape. That's a good profiterole or cream puff. And this for an éclair is much better. When you break this in half, again, the opening, the cavity is excellent. And so that every bite you take of the éclair, you'll get some filling, you'll get some dough, and you'll get some of the glaze on the top. That's a good éclair. So I'm going to show you how to make the good éclair, the good cream puff, the good profiterole, the good gougère. And these, well, give them to the chickens. Now the dough is actually cooked to start. And into a pot, 1 stick of unsalted butter, 1 cup of water, and a half a teaspoon of salt. That's it. If you want a little bit sweeter puff, and we'll make 1 batch a little bit sweeter, add 1 teaspoon of sugar. Now we're going to do 2 batches at the same time, and this one will have 1 teaspoon of sugar. Okay, so now put this on the stove, bring both of them to a boil, and then we're going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour to each of the pots. When I was catering, I would make 6 batches at a time because I use these puffs for hors d'oeuvres filled with crab meat or lobster meat or cheese. A bechamel sauce is very good inside a cream puff. Oh, the butter is melting rather quickly. Just dump the flour in and stir. And then you're going to cook the flour until there's a film of floury dough in the bottom of your pan. So if you're making 2 at a time, work quickly. 3 to 4 minutes is plenty to cook the flour. Okay, so this looks very nice. Now, put each dough into a bowl to cool slightly. You want light, silky, smooth dough. If you put the eggs in while it's too hot, your eggs will cook and you'll have kind of streaks of egg white cooked in your puffs, and that is unacceptable. I'm going to break 4 eggs for this one. You don't want any shells. The eggs are bright yellow, and they do make a kind of yellowy dough, but it does, when it bakes, it's a golden color. It's a good color. So there's our 4 eggs. Now we're going to add 1 at a time. Why 1 at a time? Because this dough cannot absorb all the eggs at once. Now watch what happens. You stir. It's very wet, and the dough kind of breaks up into segments. And you think, oh my gosh, what happened? It's all broken. Will it ever come back together again? And miraculously, it does. Watch. See how it has all come back? And now you add the next egg. Now see, there's your dough. Look how nice this is. So really beat this around. It's not too sticky, it's not too stiff. And it didn't take too long to make. Now the dough can sit like this, covered with plastic wrap, for quite a while. You can also form your puffs and let them sit on cookie sheets until you're ready to bake them. 2 to 3 hours, no problem. So here's our dough, and we are going to pipe the dough into the shapes desired. Now if you want to make eclair, you can draw pencil lines. These are 3 inches long and about 1.5 inches apart. This will give you a nice guide for the shape of eclair that you desire. If you want to make giant size ones, you can do long ones like 5 inches long, no bigger, they're too big. I'm using a tip that measures just a little bit more than 1/2 inch, and I'm using a big canvas pastry bag that's soft and malleable and will allow me to really pipe this dough well. Okay, so now the dough can go right into the bag. I would suggest putting about half the dough in. By folding the top of the bag down, I haven't gotten any dough up here. It saves dough and it makes it much easier to pipe. So we'll start with putting a little dot under each corner of the parchment paper so the parchment paper will kind of stay in place. It's like a little bit of glue here. There. And then move this to whatever position works for you. And hold and pipe. Hold and pipe. And just keep going until you fill your pan. And notice I'm only squeezing with one hand, directing with the other. Little unevenness like this can be smoothed out with a little bit of cold water in your fingertip. Just like that. And then glaze with a little bit of egg mixed with water. 1 egg, a couple tablespoons of water. And if it's well mixed, it will just glaze right on the top. And remember, make sure your oven is preheated to 375. And these should bake anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. So there, that's done. Now let's make our cream puffs, a different shape, round. And if you want to make great big cream puffs, use a full 1 inch tip and make big mounds of the pâte à choux. And more egg glaze. So get those in the oven and watch them rise. Our profiterole, our eclair, our giant cream puffs are all done. They're baked. They have puffed beautifully. They have very nice light feeling and a really nice cavity inside each one of these beautiful baked goods.
There are 2 types of meringue. First is Swiss meringue and Italian meringue. So meringue is a type of dessert often associated with French, Swiss, and Italian cuisine, traditionally made from whipped egg whites and sugar, and occasionally add acidic ingredients such as lemon, vinegar, or cream of tartar.
Swiss meringue is a combination of egg whites and sugar cooked over a water bath, then whipped until fluffy and thick. It can be used as a frosting for your favorite cake, a topping for pie, or even piped into meringue cookies. The ingredient ratios and cooking temperatures vary wildly from source to source, leading to a few common complaints. Some recipes call for a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to egg whites by weight, giving the Swiss meringue a light body and matte finish. Other recipes use a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to egg whites, making Swiss meringue creamy and dense, but prone to forming a thick and grainy crust over time. This style can also have a somewhat gooey consistency when raw. I split the difference with a 3-to-2 ratio of sugar and egg whites for a slightly glossy meringue that's both silky and light, even lighter than a French meringue made with the same ratio of ingredients. Most recipes call for cooking Swiss meringue until it's somewhere between 120 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, but because sugar protects the egg whites from coagulation, they won't actually cook over such low temperatures. With raw egg whites, those meringues aren't very stable. I overcome this problem by cooking the meringue all the way up to 175 degrees Fahrenheit, which promotes better coagulation, creating a more solid protein network for a meringue that's both fluffy and stable. To give my Swiss meringue more flavor, I start with lightly toasted sugar. Thanks to some low-key caramelization, it tastes less sweet than plain sugar. Like many other recipes, mine includes cream of tartar. In side-by-side tests, I didn't find a huge impact on volume or stability, but its acidity gave the meringue a more balanced sweetness. Instead of a liquid extract that could compromise its stability, I used vanilla bean to give my Swiss meringue a flavor and aroma that will complement any dessert. Here's how to make it for yourself at home. Prepare a large water bath using a crumpled ring of tinfoil to form a booster seat for the bowl. Combine egg whites and sugar, along with the cream of tartar and salt, plus the vanilla seeds. Place over simmering water, stirring constantly with a flexible spatula until the mixture registers 175 degrees. Transfer to a stand mixer and whip on high speed until fluffy and thick. Keep an eye on the size of the bowl. The meringue will climb higher as it grows. Stop whipping when that growth stalls out and the meringue can hold stiff peaks. When the meringue is done, it's ready to be used in anything from your favorite buttercream to meringue cookies, pavlova, or even fancy desserts like baked Alaska.
Generally speaking, a meringue is a mixture of egg whites and sugar beaten until the whites are at stiff peaks. Italian meringue is made by whipping egg whites with a cooked sugar syrup. This makes a very shiny, satiny meringue that when baked becomes glossy and crunchy. Here are the 3 steps to make Italian meringue: making the syrup, whipping the egg whites, and mixing them together. Step 1. Add the sugar and water to a saucepan and cover. The condensation of the steam drips down the sides of the pan, preventing sugar crystals from forming. Sugar crystals can totally wreck the syrup, so don't stir. Just let the water dissolve the sugar. When the mixture is boiling, remove the lid and attach a candy thermometer to the side of the pan. Lower the heat to medium-high and let it cook until its temperature reaches 240 degrees. Once the syrup is at 240 degrees, remove it from the heat. Step 2. Start whipping the egg whites on high speed. Step 3. When the whites are at soft peaks, lower the speed to medium and slowly pour the syrup into the mixer. Aim for the space between the whip and the side of the bowl. Pour the syrup in a steady stream. Increase the mixer speed back to high and whip until stiff peaks form. While the meringue is whipping, you can boil the saucepan with a little water to clean any syrup that stuck to the pan. Once you've reached stiff peaks, reduce the speed to medium and keep beating until the bowl feels cool to the touch. Pipe or spread the meringue according to your recipe right away. It gets spongy as it sits, and if that happens, gently stir it to get it smooth again.
Phyllo or phyllo dough is a very thin uneven dough used for making pastries such as baklava and borek in Middle Eastern and Balkan cuisines.
Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with homemade phyllo dough. That's right, I am very excited to show you how to make your own phyllo, which, by the way, is basically part 1 of our 2-part baklava video. So yes, even though no one's ever requested it, we will be doing baklava very soon featuring this homemade dough. And while it would be much easier and much faster to use the phyllo you buy at the store, this is going to be way more fun. Plus, we get to brag we're able to make what some people consider the world's hardest dough. By the way, as you're about to see, it's not. But that's what a lot of people think. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with some all-purpose flour in a bowl. And what we'll do is make a little well in the center, into which we will pour some extra virgin olive oil, as well as a pinch of salt. And then we'll finish this very simple dough off with some white wine vinegar. And then last but not least, some very warm water. And we'll go ahead and pour that in and give it a mix with our fingers. And as you know, many doughs I will use the electric mixer for. But this is one of those doughs I really want to feel the texture of. So we'll be going sans machine, and we'll follow our standard dough making procedure, where we mix it up in a bowl until it just comes together. And once it looks a little something like that, we go ahead and transfer it onto our work surface. And then we knead it until it's nice and smooth, using just enough flour to keep it from sticking. So just go ahead and start working with it. And if it's not sticking, just keep going. But if it does start to smear on the table, or stick to your fingers, stop and add some more. And if you're doing this by hand, we're going to knead this for about 5 minutes or so, until we end up with something very smooth and supple. And once it does start to smooth out, if you get bored with the regular kneading method, you could always give it the old 2-hand roll like this, and then smoosh it back together and keep kneading, and do that a few times. But regardless of exactly how you knead this, we're going to keep going until we have something that's very smooth, very supple, and fairly elastic. And one way you can tell you've gone far enough, if we kind of stretch the dough over itself, like I'm doing here, and the surface remains relatively smooth, we've probably gone far enough. Okay, if you do that and you get big tears across the top, you need to knead it a little longer. So that's looking good. And basically at this point our dough is done. Except for maybe the most important step, the resting. What we need to do is wrap this in plastic and let it sit out at room temp for at least an hour. Okay, longer is fine. In fact, I left mine for about 2.5 hours, since I had things to do and people to see. But just an hour is fine. After which we will unwrap it and give it a little coating of flour, at which point we will proceed to portion this into dough balls that we're going to attempt to get all the same size using a digital scale. And while it's true I usually rail against this kind of exactness in the kitchen, here it makes sense, because what I figured out through experimentation is that a dough ball that weighs 20 grams, once rolled out paper thin, is the perfect size to fit the pan I'm going to make the baklava with. So I went ahead and weighed out 20-gram portions, and as I did, I rolled those back into little balls and kept them covered with plastic. And if you're really good at this, you can do like 10 or 12 at a time, but I'm not. So I'm going to stop with 5 dough balls, which is how many I'm comfortable turning into phyllo at the same time. But before we move to that step, we have to make one more component. And that's going to be our cornstarch and flour mixture, which not surprisingly is made by combining cornstarch with some flour. And we'll give that a mix. And then you can just sprinkle this, but I like to use this fine mesh strainer, which for me makes it a lot easier to dust over evenly. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and dust some on our work surface and begin the first phase of the flattening. So what we're going to do here is take each dough ball, and using as much of that cornstarch mixture as we need, we're going to roll it out to about 5 or 6 inches. And as we finish these, we're going to stack them up, but we're going to do a little dusting of our cornstarch mixture in between each one. And basically that cornstarch is going to keep each layer separate and sort of sliding on top of each other as we roll these really thin. And to make life easier, try to get these as close to the same size and shape as you can. Which shouldn't be that hard since we started with exactly the same amount of dough. And then what we'll do once those have all been rolled out and layered up with a little cornstarch in between is take the entire pile, and then we can begin the first of 2 rollings. And basically what we're shooting for here is to roll this until it's sort of doubled in size. So take your time, don't be too aggressive, knowing full well that cornstarch is protecting the layers. And I should mention, I'm using a standard rolling pin here. There's another fairly cool method where you do larger sheets one at a time using a broomstick. But I've never tried that method, even though it looks really cool. But anyway, I kept rolling, and once we do have that rolled out to roughly double the size, we need to separate each layer and apply a little more cornstarch. Okay, the first time I tried this, I attempted to skip this step, which totally did not work, and it all stuck together. And I wasn't mad, but I was disappointed. So we'll go ahead and separate these. And then we'll restack them, making sure they're coated with enough cornstarch. And some of them, like this one in the back, are already going to have enough on it. But as you inspect these, it's going to be pretty easy to see which ones need another light dusting. So, very, very crucial. Before we attempt our final rolling, we're going to need to separate and restack these. Like I said, dusting on some more cornstarch mixture wherever we see fit. Oh, and by the way, you do not need to stack these in the same order. Okay, as long as we unstack them and make sure there's enough cornstarch between each one, it is really not going to matter. So I went ahead and reassembled my stack as shown, at which point we'll dust a little more over the top if need be. And once that's been accomplished, we will commence with the final rolling. And we're going to keep rolling until we've gone as far as we want. And as far as we want is basically paper thin. And I do like to give that stack a little half turn every once in a while, which will help us keep that round shape as we roll. And obviously the longer you do this, and the bigger it gets, the thinner your sheets are getting. So ultimately, depending on the size of the dough you started with, it's going to be up to you to decide when to stop. You are, after all, the Jackie O of how thin to go. I know this is Turkish, not Greek, but I don't know any famous Turkish people. But anyway, I kept rolling until it was about this big. And if everything goes according to plan, you should be able to peel off each layer and have one beautifully thin, still fairly supple and elastic piece of phyllo dough. Check it out, you can pretty much see my fingers through that. Although it's hard to tell with this angle. Let's go for a little backlighting. Oh yeah, that's thin. So for an amateur, I was pretty happy with how this came out. And by the way, if you do have a little excess cornstarch on there, that actually brushes off fairly easily. And if you want, you can use it immediately. Just keep it covered as you're working so it doesn't dry out. But I'm actually going to pop mine in the fridge and use it later. So what I like to do is transfer that onto a lightly dusted piece of parchment, and then place another one over the top and roll it up. And I said roll, not press. Okay, so roll that up with a nice light touch. Do not press. And once that's rolled up, we can wrap it in plastic and store that in the fridge for up to 24 hours, or pop it in the freezer. And of course, once that batch is done, we would continue with the same process, finishing the rest of the dough. And usually at this point of the video, I'd have something to taste and discuss. But that's it. Sorry to leave you hanging, but this was just how to make the dough. And you'll have to stay tuned to the next video when we use this to make baklava. And yes, there's a little teaser for you. But in the meantime, if you want to practice, just go ahead and make up a batch, and then search phyllo on allrecipes.com, and you'll see tons of options of what you can do with this amazing product. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
A crepe is a type of very thin pastry usually made from wheat flour or buck wheat flour.
Now it's time to turn pancakes into an elegant dessert with my chocolate orange crepe torte. This has 16 layers, of which 8 involve chocolate. Not just one, but 2 types of chocolate. I alternate a dark chocolate ganache with a white chocolate cremeux, but both have an orange flavor infused into them. When I make this dessert, I do make both fillings at the same time. Both start by heating cream. I need 1 2/3 cup of cream in total, and I'll divide that after I heat it up. Chocolate and orange has to be one of my favorite flavor combinations. Makes me think of holiday time, even though this is a recipe I make just about any time of year. I'm grating in the zest of an orange into the cream, because that's really the best way to work in the flavor. For the 2 fillings, I have 2 types of chocolate. In one bowl, 7 ounces of dark chocolate. That's for the chocolate orange ganache. For my white chocolate cremeux, which has a similar consistency, but is just a bit smoother, I have 8 ounces of white chocolate. Now they look like chips, but this is baking or couverture chocolate. There we go. Bubbles are breaking the surface of the cream. And now I'll measure 1 cup of this into my dark chocolate. And the remaining 2/3 I'll pour over the white chocolate. Stir the dark one first. Let the hot cream do most of the work. You just want to stir gently. Oh, I can smell that orange as the chocolate is melting. And there we go. So the ganache I leave to cool at room temperature. Now, this white chocolate cremeux, this is something special. So it starts off like a ganache, the combination of cream and white chocolate. But white chocolate won't set all on its own. If you just put this in the fridge, it would be a very soft consistency, a lot softer than a dark chocolate ganache. So after I've melted my cream and white chocolate together, I add a special ingredient, and it adds a lovely creaminess, and at the same time, it keeps the white chocolate from being too sweet. There we go. My white chocolate is fully melted. And here is the secret ingredient, 3/4 cup of Greek yogurt. The yogurt thickens up the crema as it sits, but it also balances the sweetness of the white chocolate. Because of course, plain Greek yogurt has a nice little tang to it. This I'll pop in the fridge to chill, and it will set up to the same consistency as my ganache will sitting at room temperature. While my 2 fillings set, that leaves me the perfect amount of time to make the pancakes. So I start with a cup of all-purpose flour, just a touch of sugar, a tablespoon, and now for the liquids. A crepe batter is far more fluid than, say, a breakfast pancake batter. So 1-to-1 in terms of milk to flour. So a full cup of milk added to my 1 cup of flour. 2 eggs, 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil. You could use melted butter if you wish, but I tend to use the oil simply because sometimes I make this batter recipe ahead of time and I just keep it in the fridge. If you do that with butter, your butter will solidify within the batter. And this you want to whisk until it's quite smooth. A couple of lumps are okay, but not a whole lot here. In fact, you could use a blender if you wanted to, but then you have to let the batter rest. So a simple whisk by hand. You can really see how fluid this batter is. So if I'm preparing my crepe batter ahead of time, this is where I put it in the fridge. Right before I want to make my crepes, the last ingredient, 1/2 cup of club soda or sparkling water. This really lightens up the texture of the crepe, and it makes the batter easy to handle, easy to swirl around your crepe pan. Because this is a thin, flat pancake, there's no need for baking powder or baking soda. Now, I've got my crepe pan. Takes a little fiddling around, but I heat my pan to just above medium. I'm just gonna wipe a touch of oil onto my pan. Drop the batter right in the center of the pan, and then swirl it outwards. You don't want to flip your crepe until you see the entire surface has gone matte. No more shine. And it should even start browning and pull away from the edges of the pan. I find it easiest to use a bamboo skewer and just quickly the tips of my fingers to flip it over. Just a couple seconds on its other side, and then onto a plate. And on you go. You get a really nice rhythm when it comes to making crepes. This crepe recipe makes 8 large crepes, and that's exactly what I need for this elegant crepe tort. So I'll finish making up these crepes while my 2 fillings set, and then it'll be time to pull it all together. Well, all 16 layers. I'm taking pancakes to a whole new level, 16 levels in fact, with my chocolate orange crepe tort. I have my 2 fillings that are both now the same consistency. The white chocolate orange one has been chilled and the dark chocolate one has been sitting at room temperature. I have all my crepes made, so it's time to assemble. I got my inspiration for this tort on a recent trip to Singapore, and when you visit some of the shops there, they actually have whole stores devoted to crepe torts of all different flavors. And I thought, I love crepes and I love all these fillings you can use, so I put my own version together. Now what I noticed there is the crepe torts are beautifully perfect and nicely stacked. So what I do is I trim my crepes so they're all exactly the same size. I just use a tart ring, but you could simply use an inverted bowl or even a plate and just trace around and cut it. So I'm gonna cut these all first before I assemble a thing. I'm using 8 crepes in total. And whatever you do, don't throw away these scraps, because those in a bowl, warm, with a little bit of butter and brown sugar and a spoonful of ice cream, it's like a crepe sundae. The assembly isn't overly complicated, but you just have to keep track of your layers. Start with a crepe at the bottom, and because I want to end with the dark chocolate on top, I start with the white chocolate on the bottom. Just a little spoonful. There, you can really understand why this is called crémeux. Look at that creaminess. You want a nice, even layer. Now for my dark chocolate. Once you make your ganache and you cool it to room temperature, it'll actually keep setting up until it's solid. So if you're spreading it on your torte and you find it's no longer spreadable, just warm it up a little bit, give it a stir, and away you go. I leave about a ½ inch gap around the outside, just because as you layer it on, each layer will compress on the other and push the filling to the outside a bit. I like to serve this dessert when I'm having a small group over for dinner. So you don't need a cake for 20 people. A little slice of this is really rich and satisfying. And now you want to chill this down until it's ready to serve. The finishing touch I like to add, just to let you know that there's an orange flavor in there, is adding a few candied orange slices. But of course, that's optional. And so can you believe that there's 16 layers packed into that crepe torte? I'm just gonna cut this orange slice. I love that you can find inspiration just about anywhere, and with things as simple as a pancake. Normally when I have crepes, they're warm. This is a wonderful way to enjoy them chilled.
Thanks for watching Oh Yum. Keep an eye on this channel for plenty of delicious recipes and more.
Go